Hey there, good people in crypto land. I'm Matt Lysing, and this is my podcast, Decent People. Welcome back to the conversation. Today, I spoke with Sicco Nates. He is the Director of Technical Operations at the Moonbeam Foundation. Moonbeam is a smart contract platform that allows applications to kind of go between Ethereum and Polkadot so that you can work in like Ethereum-based smart contract creation using Solidity as the software language, but then you can deploy onto Polkadot, which is, if you don't know, it's typically a lot faster than with transaction times than Ethereum, and it's a lot cheaper to use than Ethereum, because when Ethereum gets congested and there's a lot of demand, the prices for transactions go up quite a bit. So I talked to Sicco about kind of his early foray into being a journalist after his dad was a prominent journalist in Belgium, but that wasn't really for him. He didn't take to it, but he did really get kind of fall in love with the software world, where he wasn't necessarily much of a developer, but he was more on the management side of things. We talked about how he came to blockchain in 2021 and his love of gaming of all kinds, like Xbox and, video games to role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and Call of Cthulhu. And we talked a lot about how Moonbeam is working in the gaming industry. Sicco had some of the most interesting comments I've heard about what blockchain and Web3 can do for the gaming experience and what it can't do. He had some really interesting ideas about where blockchain and Web3 shouldn't be involved with game operations, but interesting ideas about where it could fit in. So with all that, let's get to the conversation. Thank you, as always, for the support, and please try to rate and give us a review wherever you get this podcast. Thanks. Hey there, Sicco. How you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Hi, Matt. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's great to meet you too. And thank you so much for coming on Decent People.
Well, thanks so much, Matt.
So I'm excited to talk to you for a lot of reasons. We're going to get into gaming and Web3 and blockchain, kind of enhancements and what gaming or what blockchain can bring to gaming, what it can't bring. But, you're also, you're director of technical operations at the Moonbeam Foundation. And Moonbeam is basically, it's a platform that allows smart contracts to connect maybe between Ethereum and, say, Polkadot, where you guys are working a lot. So you kind of get the ease, or not the ease, but because Solidity I don't think is an easy language, but you can work in Solidity like you would in Ethereum, and then just launch your project on Solana, or I'm sorry, on Polkadot through the Moonbeam platform.
Yeah, so we're a layer one blockchain. So on Polkadot. Polkadot is kind of this ecosystem of blockchain. So they've kind of built this framework where people can launch their own blockchain, but then they are kind of connected to this underlying relay chain, which I guess is like, I think Ethereum is kind of now moving, to the similar model, like what Ethereum is kind of called the beacon chain, basically, right? So, and so Polkadot, typically if you deploy a Polkadot parachain, which is kind of what it's called in their world, typically you do that not in Solidity, but in Substrate, which is this other programming language. But I think when Moonbeam was started to get built by the team, I think the idea was kind of to bring EVM compatibility, right? So that essentially you could take an application that was built on Ethereum or a smart contract, series of smart contracts that are built on Ethereum, and just wholesale port them over to Moonbeam, and things should just work out of the box without any sort of modification, code change, and so forth. It's not just about the code level. It's also just like, so we support all of the same developer tools that people are familiar with working on Ethereum, so Hardhat and Truffle and all this kind of stuff. And we also have a lot of the same tooling. So we have, Etherscan, which in our case is called Moonscan, but essentially a branded version of Etherscan. We have Chainlink for oracles and all this kind of thing. And then, so that's kind of at the base level, the value proposition that Moonbeam brings. But then a lot of our focus has been on kind of what we call connected contracts. So, the thesis a little bit is that, we believe that there's not going to be one single chain that ends up dominating all of Web3, and generally if you accept that premise, then I think you sort of very quickly arrive at a position where interoperability becomes quite important. So it needs to kind of then be easy for users to operate across different chains and kind of access the assets. So for example, think NFTs or tokens or whatever that they hold across those different chains in a kind of a seamless way. And so we want to kind of be the best place to deploy these sort of multi-chain applications.
Yeah, and that's a great application. But then kind of the other aspect here is that you get the speed of Polkadot, right?
Right.
Because Ethereum can slow down when there's a lot of usage. It can get very expensive. So you can get the speed and the relatively low cost of Polkadot while still using Ethereum virtual machine, basically, contracts.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think generally Polkadot's vision is to go towards composability, right? Where, essentially, people are building, Web3 continues to expand, and the type of use cases that people are building continues to expand. You can sort of envision if you try to build all of this stuff on a single chain, right? So all of the gaming, real world assets, DeFi protocols, NFT use cases, loyalty programs, the list goes on a single chain. Well, so now you will often have to deal with this kind of like noisy neighbor kind of problem, right? Where, some application next to you could be generating a ton of transactions, and that drives up gas fees and then makes it more expensive for users. And so yeah, the basic idea with Polkadot is that it allows you to, because parachains can kind of specialize, it allows those parachains to kind of, essentially kind of like paralyze or segment kind of the execution.
So maybe you could delineate that for me, like parachain versus a roll-up. What's the difference there?
I'm not super technical, so I'll try and do my, I have sort of like a 50,000 foot level understanding. I'll try and kind of do my best.
Okay, good, because I'm at 100,000 feet.
Yeah, okay. So I'll try and sort of do my best explanation of this. So I think there is probably some similarity, I think, in the sense that, between so if you think of something like Arbitrum or Optimism that's operating on top of Ethereum, so they are kind of doing these like rollups. They basically like bundle all of these transactions and then periodically submit these to Ethereum, and then they get validated there as well and sort of spread through the network. I think, the parachains compared to the relay chain in Polkadot, I think it does kind of work in a somewhat similar fashion, in the sense that in the Polkadot world, you submit your transactions to these collators, and the collators are specific to your specific chain. So Moonbeam has its own set of collators. Akala, Aestar, Fala, some of these other ones on Polkadot, they have their own set of collators, and they collect all of this data, but then they end up submitting it in turn to this like shared validator network, and that is shared across Polkadot. And so I think in that sense, at least architecturally, I think it is somewhat similar to like rollup. So even though I'm sure that the implementation details are quite different.
So we'll get into a lot of that in a bit, but I wanted to kind of, the news of the day right now is the SEC has approved finally the spot Bitcoin ETF.
Right.
I didn't realize it went back this far, but I guess it's been a decade in the making since they've tried to do that. Do you have any thoughts on that, or just have you been following the saga?
No, I've definitely been, I think anybody who works in crypto in one fashion or other, it's been kind of difficult to not, I think you'd have to be pretty checked out not to be paying attention to this, even though I'm personally not a big Bitcoin guy. But yeah, it's been sort of a long road with a lot of up and downs. I think even the events of the past 48 hours where, first there was this tweet from Gary Gensler saying that, the ETFs are approved, and then Bitcoin started spiking, and then 50 minutes later, it was like, oh, actually, the account was compromised. I feel like that was par for the course, right? It just kind of shows like what a bit of a painful road it's been.
That was funny because that wasn't the first fake news about this. A couple months ago, remember, I think somebody hacked into the filing system, right? And put a fake filing out there that they knew they would find, and so
right, yeah.
Bitcoin went up, I think 5% then, and then crashed back down.
Yeah, but I think generally, I think it's good news for the industry, right? I think there is sort of a lot of investment, I think, kind of sitting on the sidelines. I think, if you just think of I even have people in my family or in kind of my wider circle of friends and acquaintances who are like, well, I don't really understand this whole crypto thing. And, I don't necessarily want to kind of get involved too closely, but sure, if I could hold it in, an ETF or in my 401k or up in Canada, it's like RSP, and I could get 1 to 2% exposure, part of a diversified asset portfolio, that makes a ton of sense, right? So I think, yes, there is, I think, I believe, but I don't think I have a particularly insightful comment on this, but I think generally, I think, there is a lot of people, a lot of capital just sitting on the sidelines that was kind of been waiting for this event. And so I think this will give quite a boost to the entire industry. I think it's going to take maybe a little bit longer than some people think, because, if you think about it, okay, so the ETFs have been approved. I think I heard that, they won't start officially trading until next week. And then if you think about it, so if what we're really kind of going for here is retail, it takes a while for people that work with financial advisors. Okay, the financial advisors have to kind of now start thinking about how they present that to their clients, and then have to start having conversations. And so I think it probably, I think people are kind of expecting Bitcoin immediately to kind of shoot for $100,000 or $200,000. I think that's a little bit premature. But I think it will sort of give a lift over a longer period of time as you start seeing some of this retail money flow in, basically.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the passive sort of exposure to Bitcoin here is what's really important, because it's still tricky, to set up an account at an exchange, to set up 100%. A wallet, to you're in charge of all of that stuff, and you screw it up, it's gone forever.
Yeah,
so
100%.
Going through BlackRock or going through Vanguard or whatever, that's the way to go, I think. But just one thing I wanted to point out, which other people have already pointed this out, and Gary Gensler, the chairman of the SEC, put out a statement once, finally this was approved. And we should say this wouldn't have happened without the courts.
Right.
The courts stepped in and said, you guys already approved an ETF based on Bitcoin futures. You can't turn around and say that, you can't do an ETF on Bitcoin spot, the actual Bitcoin. It doesn't make any sense. So they were kind of forced to approve it. But yesterday, Gensler, he came out with a statement. And at the end of the statement, he says, though we're merit neutral, I'd note that the underlying assets in metals, he's talking about metals, ETFs, have consumer and industrial uses. While in contrast, Bitcoin is primarily a speculative volatile asset that's also used in illicit activity, including ransomware, money laundering, sanctions evasion, and terrorist financing. So first of all, cash is used in all of those things too, and I'm sure the SEC is in favor of cash. And I also just want to, it's frustrating to see somebody at this level still say that there's no use for Bitcoin. It's a global payment network that can't be stopped by a government or a corporation. It's having a huge effect on parts of the world where there's hyperinflation or where the banking system isn't reliable. So just in those cases alone, it's got an industrial, or maybe not industrial, but it's got a use. It's got a consumer use like metals do. So I just get really sick of that. And I know, the caveat here is Gensler is the government. And so governments are, I think, afraid of this. And that's something we shouldn't forget. He's not out there protecting retail investors from Bitcoin. He is, kind of carrying the water of the US government here, which, might not want to lose control of a global payment system or not have any, say over how it's used. So I just find that part, it's just kind of exhausting after all these years.
Yeah, I think. It was clear that he was sort of trying to send a signal saying that, well, yes, we've approved it, but under duress, because you essentially put a legal gun to our head, right? I do think, the stance is somewhat hypocritical. I always think the thing when this comes up And especially when you hear them talk about, oh, it's being used for, money laundering, terrorist financing, and so forth. I'm like, I mean, I distinctly remember, how 7-8 years ago, there was this scandal about UBS, who had basically in Mexico had at various branches had installed bigger deposit boxes because the Mexican drug cartels overnight, like they were making such massive deposits into their accounts that it didn't fit into the physical box. And I mean, these are cartels that have like a long track history of murdering and torturing people. And it's hypocritical, right? The reality is that yes, is there some criminal activity in crypto? Undoubtedly there is. I mean, is that a good thing? Of course it's not. Should we try and kind of, eliminate that? Absolutely. But it's somewhat hypocritical to argue that the same thing is not happening in fiat, right? It's not like before crypto, there was no crime, nor that crime found a way to move assets around, basically. So yeah, and I think crucially, like when you look at something like UBS, like these like larger banking institutions, they've never really been held up to the same level of scrutiny or accountability that's clearly the crypto industry is being put through. So yeah, I think I agree. I would agree with you.
It's very diplomatic of you to say that it's hypocritical, and then the fines that they get, even though they're in the billions of dollars, it's a slap on the wrist for a global investment bank like UBS.
Right.
All right, let's go back a little bit. I was interested to see that you used to be a journalist, and that you were covering. I think you started covering maybe the .com boom.
No. So a bit of misunderstanding there. So I did want to. So I had a little bit of an unusual path to crypto, in the sense that I think you get a lot of people with sort of like computer science degree. I actually had a degree in political social science. So when I was in university, I mean, it was a long time ago because I'm an old guy now, but I wanted to go into journalism. The reason for that was my father was actually he was a well-known TV anchor. Basically, he was like the news anchor in Belgium for I think over a decade, and also ran like sort of Belgium's versions of 60 Minutes. And so it was a bit of monkey see, monkey do, right? So I had this aspiration of going to journalism. I did do an internship as a TV reporter while I was still in university. I was offered a job at a local TV station. Kind of realized I didn't like the job. It was, I think, I was young, right? So I had sort of very naive aspirations of, I'm going to do the grand investigative reporting. And the reality is a lot of, certainly when you're early in your career, a lot what you do is like, well, they're rerouting this tram line.
Yeah.
Go talk to the local merchants for like an hour and find out how it impacts their business. And that wasn't exactly what I was like super excited about.
When I started, I was covering water board meetings in Stinson Beach, which on a Saturday morning, So
right.
You got to pay your dues.
The thing I was specifically kind of turned off by was that it sort of became very clear to me very rapidly that even within that internship, that you really don't have a lot of time to work on any story whatsoever. You get, in the morning you come in at the redaction, they kind of tell you what to go pursue, and then there's a camera crew. There's like more reporters than camera crews, so like you on site you get like 30 minutes. And so I was kind of like, I don't know, I was like, okay, so how, I mean, can I even do the role as a journalist and like do honest reporting if I get so little time to even investigate the story? And so that didn't feel right to me. And so so basically I didn't pursue that career. Then I was sort of like wondering, okay, so what am I going to do with my life? Like I think a lot of people do when they come out of university, and ended up working for a large French telecommunications company in sort of an IT/webmaster role. Without a computer science background, but it turned out I guess I kind of had a knack for it, and I greatly enjoyed the work. I really enjoyed how programming and development had just a tremendous amount of variety. It sort of felt like you were doing something different every single day. And it was you're never solving the same problem twice. I mean, tech moves really quickly, so you continuously have to kind of stay informed and updated. And and I never really looked back. I mean, my entire career has been in tech for 27 years, basically. So, yeah.
With your father's background, you must have kind of grown up in a cosmopolitan household, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my family is like, my parents separated. I have a half brother and a half sister who are half American, half Japanese. My wife's from Ireland. We live in Canada, Arkansas, born here. I mean, we're
like the United Nations.
Yeah, a little bit like it's a very sort of diverse family, basically. So yeah, definitely.
Well, would you say that your dad instilled in you like maybe a love of curiosity, or?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, my mother too. I think I've always kind of wanted to know how things work and kind of from top to bottom, and I have very wide-ranging interests. I mean, yes, tech has been my career, but I read a lot about, very interested in history, very favorite topic of mine, especially the kind of more obscure parts of history. I kind of, very interested in sort of the period of 600. So everybody, when we go in school to Belgium, you get sort of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, and then suddenly it's the Middle Ages, and I'm always like, what happened in that 700-year gap in between? And so it turned out that what people call the Dark Ages, sort of a very formative period of Europe's history. So I tend to, very broad-ranging interests, and obviously politics, current events, kind of, I don't know. I think personality-wise, I kind of like to know a little bit about everything. As opposed to sort of, going deep into like one specific topic, basically.
Man, you sound like a journalist to me, because I like that as well. I like to know a little bit about a lot of things, and I really like to know how things work, so that once I understand how something works, then only then can I usually write about it. And so that started with me with like Wall Street, and when I went to Bloomberg News, and I had no idea about finance, but I was kind of thrown in the deep end and had to figure out how derivatives work, and what's the fixed income market. And then I found out once I kind of got to a certain level of knowledge, I knew more than the editors did, and so it was nice to have that sort of they would be looking to me for things rather than like telling me what to do.
Right.
Is there anything from the Dark Ages that you've discovered or read about that just like blows your mind that you could share?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to me, specifically, I mean, I don't know, pretty far from crypto, but I think, especially if you want to understand kind of how the modern Europe came to be, like you have to look at that period of 600 to 900. I mean, this is when, you had sort of, this kingdom that formed Francia, under I'm trying to remember his name now. I think it was Alfred the Great, who then basically when he died, he had these three sons, and then it broke up into like three different kingdoms, like Germania, Lotharia, and Francia, and that pretty much became the political dividing lines that determined like much of the history of like the next 1500 years, right? I mean, that became France, Germany, and then Lotharia is kind of like, I think, a little bit what I call Luxembourg, which is like Netherlands, Belgium, and the Benelux, and that is really where like a lot of these dividing lines that fueled so many of these conflicts and mass people migrations over the next 1500 years, even well into the 20th century, with both world wars, very much originated there. And so, I just find that such a fascinating period. I really kind of like knowing just the entire sequence of events. And the other thing I often think about is like just how history does repeat, right? It's there's all these events happening right now in the world, the war in Ukraine, and obviously what's happening in Israel and Palestine, and these great migrations of people, and that obviously leads to friction and conflict. But that is not new. Like that has happened in every period throughout humanity's existence, and there's always been wars and suffering, and so I kind of like to sometimes take a little bit of that sort of a little bit of a longer look.
No, it's great to have that perspective. It sometimes makes me chuckle covering this, covering crypto and Web3 a lot. There's so many young kids, not kids, but they're younger people in this space. And not just, like the history that you're talking about, but like sometimes the lack of awareness about how regulation works in the United States, or the way that,
right.
the government is going to come after you if you're breaking the law. It's just sort of like, it's like, come on guys, let's, you need to have a little perspective here. But I'm curious. So then, I think you got into blockchain around 2021, which I don't mean this any disrespect, but that's a little bit late. Like, what was it? Did you come across it before and kind of like dismiss it, or what was your kind of way that you were introduced to it?
I mean, I think I was definitely late. I mean, I'm not going to disagree there. There's no denying that. Yes, I mean, I think I had heard about Bitcoin very early on, like probably 2009, and I remember thinking at the time, I mean, what? Like, okay, there's some sort of online money, and I don't know, it just seemed like kind of a fad at the time that I think specifically remember, I think people were like paying pizza with it for like massive amounts, and I was like, okay, this is never going to have really any real value, which sometimes shows that I think I'm not necessarily a good predictor of where the future goes. But I think like, so most of my career has been I mean, I had sort of a 10-year stint as kind of like as a developer slash architect, and then sort of went into, management and, did the whole team lead and, director, senior director, VP of engineering. So I have, a lot of experience sort of leading, distributed teams, like not just, teams that were like physically close to me, but also people, I mean, I worked at like a large multinational company, so I had teams all over the planet and distributed time zones and so forth. And, I mean, yes, I mean, I kind of went into management out of a passion of, as a developer, you're sometimes looking at the people that are giving you direction. You're like, I don't know that these guys know what they're doing. And so I had maybe the temerity to think that, I could do a better job, and very much, it was very much kind of out of a service mentality. I wanted to kind of really, be an advocate for the people that were working for me, and make sure developers, were kind of getting their needs met and so forth. And yeah, I mean, you spend any time in management, you see the stuff that works, you learn a lot. I think my viewpoint did shift quite a bit, and I understood over time that it was kind of a difficult role and comes with its own challenges. But, you also just see the bloat, right? Like there's just, you do end up with like a lot of, middle management that then has to justify kind of its existence and this kind of thing. And I think that's kind of what brought me to crypto, was this sort of, sort of this combination of, my interest in history and politics and kind of, why societies are the way that they are. Some of my frustrations of working at larger companies and some of the inefficiencies I saw there. And it just, I'm just like, nobody's trying anything different. It's still sort of, if you think about politics, the general message is democracy, the best system that we've ever invented. Okay. But like, can we do better? And like, nobody seems to want to tinker with like the basic, proposition, right? And especially when it comes to corporations are still built and set up the way that they were for like, I mean, more than 100 years basically. And so that was what fascinated me about crypto, that here's at least there's a group of people that are willing to kind of take that status quo and actually say, well, like, you know what, this isn't working for people anymore. Let's see if we can, change the model. And it's messy. And I think decentralization often in some ways doesn't work and becomes very chaotic, but I think it's brave. I mean, I admire the courage of everybody working in this industry to try and find kind of original path, and that very much appealed to me and is kind of what brought me here. So yeah.
With your interest in politics and history, how much of that do you think helped propel kind of the crypto industry in its early days? I'm trying to think of the word, but I can't think of it right now. That just the way that folks are rejecting the current systems. Apart from the technology, have you had thoughts on, like the philosophy of it all and how important that is?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, this may be a bit of a tripe point, but I mean, Bitcoin and Satoshi came out of the 2008 financial crisis. And I'm old enough that I lived through that. I mean, I was, and it was very interested in it at the time when it was happening. I was all over the news and like reading about Barclays and like subprime mortgages. And I specifically remember in the case of Barclays Bank, these stories about, and like seeing it on BBC News, right? How, the Queen got her money out and like ordinary retail holders were like holding the bag. and I think, there is this thing where like, the banks are not your friend, right? They're not, you are the product. Like, you are, they're not there to make you money. You're making them money. And once the thing falls apart, like I think, as a lot of people found out in 2008, suddenly there's nowhere to turn to. Like, people have worked their entire lives and have accumulated savings. And then because of things that are completely outside their control, that they had no direct involvement in, the system fails and everybody just washes their hands of it. The large, banks, walk away from it. Governments say, well, like, there's nothing we can do. This is the system it's the way the system works. I think, it's just an abject failure of accountability. And I think, so I think 100%, I think, very much kind of in line with that ethos and totally understand how people, I think that kind of was like a big impelling factor, basically.
Yeah. And it's also a little discouraging to what happens in the wake of like the financial crisis was, we fixed the system for the last crisis, right? Like it's all retroactive. So now that thing can't happen again, but that's not what happens. It doesn't take into account.
It just moves to the next. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it doesn't take into account where are the vulnerabilities still in the system? And so many times those vulnerabilities come down to oh, it's a dark market, or, you don't, the banks won't tell you what's going on there because they're making a shit ton of money
Right.
in
Right.
those areas. And that's where the risk builds up. So was there something in crypto that really grabbed you, and like a use case or a project or something that really just made you say, okay, I gotta jump in?
The one that when I got into it, I mean, I was listening to like a lot of podcasts and trying to kind of understand, okay, so what is all this? Why are people talking so much about this, right? And I think I sort of intuitively grasped the whole, for example, Bitcoin is a store of value. I mean, value is like a somewhat subjective. It's a subjective construct, right? Why do we assign value to money? Well, because it's a collective illusion, because you and I agree, and the store owner who we give the dollar bills to, they agree that this piece of paper has value. So that is not a difficult concept to grasp. But I was like, okay, but then, when you start thinking about Ethereum and smart contracts, I think the one that kind of really, I'm trying to remember now. I think it was LifePeer. I remember like listening to this podcast on LifePeer, and where they were kind of explaining how, I think it was LifePeer. I think they basically have this like platform where they handle the encoding and storage of video, right? And in my previous role, I mean, I was working at this, large company, multinational company. We were using a lot of like cloud hosting services, so working a lot with AWS and so forth, and heavily involved in, well, both like the implementation of that and, kind of understanding our AWS costs and like trying to lower them and so forth. And this was the thing that like sort of really for me made the light bulb go on, because, I worked a lot with AWS, familiar with their account management and their interfaces and their systems. And I mean, they've built an awe-inspiring thing. I mean, AWS runs like 50% of the internet, and when you work with the AWS tooling, it is really, really good. Like, I mean, they have, I think it's very difficult for people to replicate that because they have so many engineers working on it. But then when I learned about LifePeer, where basically, they built this application, and this is older, this is like 2015 or 2016, but they basically built this application where, people can, shoot a video with their mobile phone, and then in this distributed network have the video both encoded and hosted. And essentially there is no company. It's just people coming together, building, hosting these nodes, getting incentivized by the underlying protocol to make compute available. And it delivers like similar functionality without the overhead of, I mean, think, so if AWS has 350,000 people, think about the amount of managers and VPs and I guess people like me in my previous role, and like they don't exist. And that just blew my mind, that like there was this like different model that you could build. And that to me really kind of made me understand. I felt like at that point I kind of intuitively grasped, sort of the benefits of smart contracts and then tokens as incentives in order to incentivize, economic activity that contributes to the health of the network and so forth. That to me was like a pretty big paradigm shift. So
it's like taking something that you're very familiar with in a Web 2 world and decentralizing it and making it Web 3. Yeah. It's fascinating. Okay, so what was the next step then? Then what, like once you had that realization, what did you need to do about it?
I mean, I was like, my previous role was kind of ending, and I did know various people that were like working in the industry, and sort of, I mean, I sort of at this point I had been sort of in like management for 12 or 13 years basically at this one specific company, and it's just time to go do something else. It was like, like at some point you just want to get like new challenges, right? Just like a change of scenery. And and then I sort of reached out to some of those people, and I had good relationships with them, and they were interested in kind of working together, and then I came over. And I think initially I did spend quite a bit of time kind of learning about kind of more on the tech side, at least. Again, like I'm not, again, right, I'm like the guy that knows a little bit about everything, so I can kind of, I've written some software that does like token transfers and so forth, and so I've like at least a high level understanding of how some of this works, enough to kind of build like some basic applications. But then at some point, like within started working for the foundation, and my role became more about sort of like grants and ecosystem development and this kind of thing. So and again, I've been kind of the guy traditionally that like I go where I'm kind of needed, you know what I mean? So, and I tend to be pretty adaptable. So yeah, I'm kind of the guy that you slot in when you kind of have a gap, basically. So
I've been told you have a love of gaming.
I do,
like
yeah.
all sorts of games.
That's right.
And I think Polkadot, that's a big application on Polkadot, if I'm not mistaken. Was that something that drew you to Moonbeam specifically?
Yeah, I think I've been quite involved in actually kind of trying to build like Moonbeam's gaming strategy. So yes, I mean I am a I am a hardcore nerd. I'm not gonna lie about that. I've been video gaming since I was 8 years old, and I'm 49. So that's 4 decades of a lot of wasted hours building stuff in games.
I wouldn't say wasted.
Yeah. So so not just video games. I mean, I've video games, a console. I'm mainly like a PC gamer. I do have like a PlayStation, but I'm more like I tend to like kind of games that take like a larger time investment, so like role-playing games or strategy games, so forth. I do have, you probably tell, I've large collection. That's like portion of it, but I've also been a avid pen and paper role-playing gamer since I was 13 years old. So started like so many people with Dungeons and Dragons, but I had a pretty good group of friends in Belgium that I used to play with every week on Wednesday, and everything, right? Like Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, Roll Master, Lore Master, Middle Earth role-playing, Cyberpunk, Call of Cthulhu, which was always like a big favorite of mine, and then from there also, I mean, once you get into that, you get into like sort of wargaming, so like a little bit of Warhammer, and then also a lot of collectible card trading games. So I was like a very, very early player of Magic, because I have a friend who had a connection to Wizards of the Coast, and so I think I was one of the first people to get my hands on it, basically. So that was kind of fun, and yeah, so that's been like a big passion of mine. And again, everything kind of comes together, right? I like playing games. I also like thinking about kind of like business models and how those could transform and how you could kind of drive better engagement for players and so forth. And yeah, so I've been heavily involved in kind of helping to build Moonbeam's gaming strategy and trying to get more games to deploy. Yeah.
I mean, Dungeons and Dragons, if you've got the right group of people, there's nothing better, in my opinion, because it's just pure imagination, and it's just so much fun. And the rules are there, but that's then the sky's the limit. And I was wondering, you mentioned Magic. Were you ever involved with Mt. Gox before it was a Bitcoin?
I was not. No.
Exchange.
No.
Okay.
No.
For those who don't know, I think Mt. Gox stands for Magic the Gathering Online Exchange, and it was.
Oh, nice. Okay, I did not know that. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it was originally
cool.
an online exchange for cards.
Oh, okay. That's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think it was Cesar Vansaris or something. I can't remember who they bought the domain and turned it into a Bitcoin exchange, but kept the name Mt. Gox. So now, okay, your love of gaming is here, and now your understanding of blockchain is here. There are some things that marry very well, and some things that don't. Can you let's talk about that? What are the things that you think like a Web3 environment or an on-chain environment can do to make gaming better for a user, for a player?
So I think that's where I have maybe some unusual ideas. I think, I hear a lot of people in the industry talk about, true ownership of gaming assets, right? So the basic concept, so let's like Magic the Gathering as an example. Let's say Magic was a Web3 game. Okay, so now I own the cards in some sort of digital format, and you and I could trade them, right? So you could now kind of create a market for that. I think that's what everybody's kind of chasing, but I think there are like a couple of challenges with that model. And like I think specifically for a gaming asset to have value, it has to have utility. I mean, I guess there is a little bit of you could also look at it as like achievements. So you could say, well, I was the first to slay this boss or get this item, and there's some NFT representation of that. And I guess the digital bragging rights, and that has value, but then can you trade that? Can I sell you the fact that I was the first one to kill the dragon, because now you have the achievement, but you didn't actually earn it? So that I'm a little skeptical of that, right?
It's more like reputation almost, right?
So the reputation, right? So,
right, yeah.
And so the idea is like, okay, but you could theoretically, you have true ownership of assets. So if the game goes out of business or the team stops building it or whatever, you still own the card or the sword or the dragon or the armor or whatever. Okay, but if the game doesn't work anymore, does that have any utility? Like, does that even mean anything at that point? I think at that point the value of it would like just evaporate. So I think that's a little bit of a fool's errand that people are chasing. I think it would work if you had interoperable NFTs, right? So if you had an NFT that worked on game A and also worked in so imagine a sword that works in two games, right? And built by different publishing studios. That could work. And I think there's definitely a value proposition there. I just don't see a lot of people building it. And I think, there are some challenges. I think, a lot of these studios are, they're, gaming development is a very expensive business. It costs a lot of money up front. You're doing a lot of upfront investment. And then, takes 3, 4, 7 years sometimes for like really large games to build and deploy, and then only then do you start making money. And so I think a lot of these studios are like, they're extremely cost conscious. I don't think they have a lot of time for this sort of.
And they want to have a moat around them, right?
They want to have a moat, right? And so it's like, yeah. So like if I'm building a game and you're building a game, it'd be great if you implemented functionality for my NFTs. But why would I do it for yours and the other way around? And so somewhere like this cooperation, while at least on paper it exists, in practice I think it breaks down and you don't actually see this. So I do think that model can work, but I think you almost need like an outside third party. I think you need something like the PlayStation Network or Steam or the Xbox Network who comes in and like incentivizes studios to build this sort of like interoperable NFTs. So imagine something where a publisher like that, right, or like a distribution vehicle almost, because that's really what Steam and like PlayStation Network are. Imagine that they're issuing NFT collections and then kicking back a portion of the sales back to the studios, and then in return saying, hey, you need to offer support for this. I think that could work, and I'm talking to sort of a couple of outfits that are kind of looking at that model, but I think it's still pretty early days, basically. You know what I mean? So yeah. So I think that's one, and I think that seems to be what everybody is chasing to some extent. I don't think that's the only one. I think the ones that I'm also interested in are like, so competition over assets, I think is kind of an interesting one. So again, kind of a concept from Magic, right? Magic had this very early on. You could do like a duel with somebody for ante, and where, you could say, well, I have my deck with 40 cards, you have your deck with 40 cards. I randomly pull one out, you pull one out, we have the duel. If you beat me, you get that card that you pulled out of my deck. And so that could be something with a lot of value, it could be something with very little value. It definitely makes the game a lot more exciting and also nerve-wracking, right? And so I think that could add like a lot of immersion for games. So I think EVE Online, for example, has built, I think, an entire business model on this where a core part of EVE Online's gameplay is the underlying economy, and specifically competition over assets in the economy, and also the destruction of each other assets, right? And it just makes it so much more compelling and immersive, because now you have some, you don't just have like fake internet points at stake. You have something that actually has like monetary value. And I think so that could add, I mean, it's not going to be for every gamer, but I think there is an appetite among a large subset of gamers to be able to do to have that kind of experience, basically. I think governance over the game itself, I think, would be a super interesting concept to explore. I mean, I haven't played any competitive game, any game that involves like multiple people. Single player games, maybe not. But at the minute that it's multiplayer, whether you're even fighting or cooperating, invariably, if you go to the forums of whatever that game is, World of Warcraft, Diablo, Magic, even EverQuest back in the time, the number one thing you read on the forums is the game's not balanced. The developers are not listening to the community knows better than the developers how this stuff works. Why don't we have more say in it? I mean, that to me has governance written all over it. And so I think it'd be super interesting to have a game where the community could say, we're either the rule set of the game, right? How much something costs, or how much energy it costs to use, or how much damage it does, or how difficult it is to build, or I mean, any of those aspects are on chain. And then a subject, and is something that you could alter through like a governance vote. I think also like the direction of the game, right? What's the features that we should add next?
Are you thinking like a DAO structure?
Yeah, DAO structure. Yeah, basically. I think that'd be super compelling. I think, if you can get, some sort of multiplayer game, especially if it has a competitive element, and the community themselves can decide kind of, what strategies work, what strategies don't work, like what the direction of the development studio should be. I think, I don't know. I mean, I think you have something that has not been done in Web2 gaming. And I think that to me crucially is like, For Web3 gaming to work, to really work, to get mass adoption, I don't think it's enough to imitate what Web2 gaming is already doing, because Web2 gaming already has digital collectibles and all this kind of stuff. I think you have to figure out, how do you add something that you don't have in traditional gaming that actually like moves the needle and creates new experiences? And I think that's where gamers really get on board with it.
Yeah, that's cool. It's maybe not ownership so much, but as like the governance or the direction of the game. And so you're going
direct involvement.
Yeah, active involvement, engagement. And you're going to the forums and saying, all right, you got these issues? Well, then put your money where your mouth is, and like step up. Because I think, as we've seen, as DAOs have been around for a while, but it's very difficult, like it's very, I think they are hard to manage. They're proving to be kind of, it's like, who's going to step up and actually do the work in amidst a community. But in a gaming community like this that we're talking about, I think the incentives are there, and
Right.
there could be the energy to kind of do those things that in other areas maybe it's just not there yet. How is the performance of, like, let's take Polkadot for example. I know it's a very fast and relatively cheap blockchain ecosystem. Is that enough for gaming at this point, or do we still have a ways to go for the underlying kind of like blockchain structure?
I actually think that block times actually don't matter. I mean, so and the reason I say that is like, so I think Polkadot right now, I think block times are like 12 seconds. There is work coming like later in the year to lower it to 6. That's pretty fast. Is it the fastest? No. I mean, just frankly, like Arbitrum has like better block speed. It's like sub-second basically, right? So, but even sub-second is, from a gaming experience point of view, it's super slow, right? If I'm shooting you with a gun, or I'm opening a loot box, or I'm looking at your inventory, or I'm hitting you with a sword, then there's like a 1 second delay. It's just a horrible gamer experience. I mean, think about it. Like gamers, so much of the marketing around gaming hardware is about like, my monitor has like sub 5 millisecond response time. Like that's like, it's like a 200th of like the fastest block time, right? So, and graphic cards are like, it's all about like pushing like, higher frames per second. I mean, people now swear by like a game under 60 frames per second is like unplayable. So I just think that like, this is a bit of a red herring.
So is it it's like for things that are not in the actual gaming experience, maybe?
No, I think you can just basically, I think of necessity, studios will kind of code around this. So I think in the beginning, when gaming kind of started in Web3, everybody was like, let's just put everything on chain, like the whole thing, right? Like the whole gaming backend, there's like no off-chain component. The whole thing is on chain, and you're essentially just working with the UI, and it talks directly to like the underlying RPC nodes. I think a lot of those studios that have tried that have found that it's very difficult to implement. I mean, you mentioned it in the beginning, Solidity is not an easy programming language. I mean, it is pretty arcane, and so I think it drives the complexity up a lot. I think it becomes very costly, because now if every time I shoot somebody I have to like do a transaction and pay for gas, like that, I mean, I don't know that that's economic, right? So I mean, I have spent like a lot of time over the last 6 months talking to gaming studios, trying to understand kind of where the market's headed, and like all these serious gaming studios are like, listen, this is not what we're doing anymore. Like, even if we are putting a lot of stuff on chain, like we're basically like you're first talking to like an off-chain component, and it's like then kind of buffering everything and then deploying it, and then like kind of like putting it on chain so that people can like validate the results. And so to them, whether the block time is like a second or 6 seconds, or even in case I remember one studio saying even 10 minutes on Ethereum is actually perfectly fine from block time, because we're just basically going to code around it. Like, we're not putting everything like with like where like gamers feel the latency of like writing to the blockchain. But that's just not how we're developing it anymore. Where I think a lot of the ask is from the gaming studios, it's actually in a different area. It's like tooling around, it's built for gaming, right? So if you think about this for game studios, if they're building a blockchain game, blockchain is just one of the technologies now that they're dealing with. They also have to deal with UX and asynchronous communication to backend servers, and they're obviously having databases and like message like buses and all this kind of thing, and a lot of the gaming studios, like, I mean, I mean, again, sounds gonna sound right, but like their DNA is in gaming, right? So they're like very used to working with Unity and Unreal. They don't want to spend 3 years getting fully up to speed with like blockchain technology to be able to use it. It's also like gaming developers and blockchain developers, they're kind of a very different type of profile. It's difficult to find people with both skills. And also, frankly, blockchain developers are expensive, a lot more expensive than gaming developers. And so again, studios being kind of cost conscious, that's not where they want to go. So the way that they think about it is the way that they think about every other technology is like, is there an API I can use, right? So like I have specific things I need to do with the chain, or they're like, I need mint NFTs or the transactions or like a check a token balance. Can you wrap that for me in a nice REST API? Is there like stuff that you can give me to make it easier to, create a wallet for a user, because I don't want to really force the user to connect to their wallet. I just want them to sign up with their social login. And so I think that's where a lot of the growth is I think that, or like the opportunities lies in like kind of building more of this kind of tooling to some extent, to somewhat abstract away the blockchain. It's there, but to make it easier for these gaming studios to focus on their core business, which is building the game, and then just integrating the technology like they integrate a database or anything else.
So maybe it could be something where you're not in gameplay, but then like not everything else, but a big part of what your character is doing or your gaming experience is then like NFT based, or it's like you're at the store and you're trading, or like you said,
or the result of a duel or a match. You could see how
and
that.
Then
could
you've got a verifiable record of truth and everything like that, so that it's all above board. All right, cool. That does make sense, because I've never quite understood how you would have gameplay in a blockchain environment when like you said, even sub-second times are not enough. So how's Moonbeam kind of dealing with all of these things that we're talking about, and where are you guys, like, you're the director of technical operations there. Where are you, like you mentioned it a little bit, but like I want to ask you directly, where are you talking to people? Like, where do you see the opportunities for you guys, and what do you think, where's the need right now that needs to be met?
Yeah, I think where the opportunities for us are is like, well, I think we're working on attracting more games to come to Moonbeam, right? So I mean, there are a number of native homegrown teams and that have deployed games, and Everloot and Great Escape, XR Race, and so forth, and those guys are great. We're essentially interested in increasing that stable, right? If you think about it, there's this thing where like, there's this sort of networking effect that you get, especially because like at some point games can start cross-pollinating and saying, well, if you're playing this game on Moonbeam, like you might also want to check out this one, right? So that's part of it. I think, we're interested in, we're also interested in kind of like the infrastructure around gaming, because I think, you are going to see like, these like marketplaces. I'm a big believer in sort of the need for something like, like the PlayStation Network or Steam or some type of interface. So we're talking to a number of teams that are kind of building it. I'm actually talking to one right after this.
Can you do that in a decentralized fashion, or do you need some of this to be centralized?
No, I mean, I think there are like sort of aspects of like, like a lot of what now happens in blockchain, like, I mean, so many of the teams, and I talk to a ton of teams. I mean, I'm part of the grant committee, so we have all these grant calls and stuff. I mean, a lot of teams now have sort of like a mix of like off-chain and on-chain architecture. And so I think, so if you think about sort of like, like kind of like an infrastructure team around this, so they would have, like an on-chain NFT marketplace. They may be running sort of various promotional campaigns and doing airdrops and stuff like this to try and get people to come to different games. You could see how like achievements in a game could be that you could then portray in a storefront end, right? Hey, I've been the first to kill this boss, and now I have this special, I don't know, avatar picture that I could display, and now I'm like working in community forums, right? And or if there's like a game dev forum, you could see that, hey, like I have some legit gaming bona fides, right? Because I was part of this guild that,
Yeah, I mean, I could imagine a metaverse, right, where you've got your avatar, and because you've got so many accolades, you look like you're fucking badass, right? Amongst all the other folks. And I think people would enjoy that and gravitate to that.
I also think guilds, I mean, I always feel like in a way I wonder kind of, I don't know who came up with the concept of a DAO, but I wonder if the person that did was inspired by gaming guilds, because I feel like gaming guilds were almost like DAOs of all lettre, right? Like I mean, before you had tokens, you had dragon kill points in EverQuest, and like people were like rewarding each other for participating in 10-hour raids and so forth. And so so you can see how, like, you know, sort of guilds, right? I mean, a guild has many of the same challenges as a DAO has. There's like governance proposals that need to get put through. You need engagement from your community. You have probably some higher ranked people or officers who are like in charge of recruiting. I mean, you know, this kind of thing. And so, you know, yeah, I mean, a lot of this just has like blockchain written all over it, basically. You know what I mean? So, so I think that's where like a lot of the opportunities lie. Yeah, like SDKs to make it easier, things to like do like make it easier for people to sign up with like just like a social login, right? So where a wallet gets created in background, but like, you know, like at least initially when you're starting your foray into Web3 gaming, you know, you're just logging in with your Google account and you're not even aware of the fact that there's a wallet getting created. I mean, you know, like, yeah, there's just a ton of opportunities there. And I think you can think of it like, you know, yes, gaming studios, like, you know, they need a lot of money. Okay. Another way to lower their cost is if there's just off-the-shelf solutions that they can use, right? So if just an off-the-shelf solution for social login, okay, well, that's X amount of time that they don't have to spend developing it themselves. And so I think that's where, like, you know, I think we're looking at a lot of those type of things as areas for product investigation, basically.
Is it fair to say that you are like really dependent on Ethereum, because that's sort of where this starts, right? And then you can port the smart contracts that are usable in the Ethereum virtual machine and Ethereum in general over to Polkadot?
No, I wouldn't say that we're dependent on them. I mean, I think you know, EVM as a standard, yes. I mean, I think, you know, the Ethereum virtual machine as a technology, you know, and I mean, that is the mechanism that we've chosen because we just generally believe there's just a ton of developers, you know, in Web3. I mean, this is the language that has the most developer representation. Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, that's how you get the broadest reach of developers that could potentially deploy on their platform. So yes, in that sense, like, we're heavily committed to like the Ethereum standard, but I wouldn't say that we're dependent on like the Ethereum blockchain. I mean, we have people that are, you know, that are just building. I mean, you know, we have, you know, projects and app studios coming to us. They've never deployed on any chain, and like Moonbeam will be the first chain that they ever deploy on, basically. So yeah.
And I guess I'm asking that just to say, or to ask you, what do you see in 2024 for that ecosystem? Like, what do you hope to see, and do you have any kind of predictions or thoughts about where things are heading?
Yeah, for like Moonbeam gaming specifically.
Yeah, and I guess maybe Ethereum in general.
Yeah, I think just generally, I mean, we've talked a lot about gaming. I think to me, like the big growth cases, I mean, DeFi's always been there, right? That's kind of almost part of the core DNA of Web3 at this point. I mean, we have an extensive DeFi ecosystem on Moonbeam. I think it's somewhat dependent on token prices, unfortunately, as the entire market. Mm-hmm. As the market goes down, you know, it's sort of like people like kind of lose interest as the market picks back up again. So it tends to be like rather volatile. But I think outside of that, I think gaming's a significant growth area. I mean, I think we are getting a ton of grant applications. We're talking to, like, we have a lot of inbounds from studios, you know, that are interested in deploying or at least want to explore it and want to see if they can get a grant and stuff like this. So I think that's definitely one area. I think real world assets is another one. You know, we have a lot of teams specifically in Brazil that I think we're getting quite a lot of traction with.
Is that like land grant, like or land title, or are we talking like financial instruments?
Like more kind of financial. So like, for example, think like things like so Brazil's kind of an interesting country because they have so like a lot of Latin American countries, they have had challenges with high inflation. And so, you know, when you talk to a Brazilian guy, unlike a European and an American, you don't have to convince them of the benefits of Web3. They instantly get it. They're like, well, yeah, I mean, I don't trust the banks. And if I put the money under my mattress, you know, it devalues too quickly. So they don't have any problem getting...
Are you listening, Gary Gensler?
Yeah, they have no problem with understanding. They intuitively grasp the benefits of Web3. I think, you know, there are a lot of challenges there with like getting access to credits. And so I think, you know, there are use cases there where people are looking at just providing ordinary like retail consumer credit and being able to source it from Web3. So I think, you know, we're seeing a number of use cases there.
And isn't this I know this is the case in Southeast Asia, but a lot of times it's not a lot of money that people need. Like we're talking maybe hundreds or just like several $1,000s would be a big game changer for them.
100%. Yeah. So, so I think it's things like this. I mean, we're seeing stuff like, there's interest around, things like, solar energy and like solar production and like kind of commoditizing it and trading it so again, and I think there is a hunger for this in crypto because I think people do want to, yes, I mean, the pure DeFi stuff is like, it's insanely volatile. There is a segment of the DeFi community or the degen community or Web3 that loves that volatility, right? It's a way where people can quickly see, their gains. Of course, also you could quickly see losses. I think there is also an appetite for this like more stable, steady source of revenue that's like a bit more predictable, and RWAs like or real world assets are like just a fantastic use case for that. So again, to your point, in some of these countries a little can do a lot basically, and people don't have no way right now of getting credit or access to funding via other means. So yeah, and that to me is a fantastic use case. I mean, so even from a social justice perspective, I think it's a fantastic use case. So,
yeah, totally agree on that. Sicco, thank you so much, man. This has been really fascinating. I love your perspective on gaming. It's definitely different than I've heard before, but I think it's absolutely pragmatic, and I just really like your perspective. Just let people know if they want to learn more about Moonbeam and about what you guys are doing, how they can do that.
Encourage people to come look at Moonbeam.network. That's our main site. There's links to our forums there. I think we have a pretty active community, and so I think that's a good way for people to get more information. Subscribe to our Twitter handle. I think we're regularly putting up updates either about technology changes or new teams that are deploying and launching. So I think just generally Google Moonbeam and we have a pretty big presence. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, hey man, best of luck to you guys. I'll be keeping an eye on what you're doing, and best of luck for everything in 2024. That's it for this episode. Thanks for joining us, and make sure to subscribe and rate us at Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Decent People is a production of Decential Media. It is produced by Curtis Fritsch, with music by Brian Duncan and Kareem Ives.